The Trade Minister has apologised to the Prime Minister for his initial response to reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping here. Todd McClay's version of events has changed again. He now says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been assessing the veracity of the allegations for the past few months. Last week, of course, Mr McClay said he didn't know anything about a Chinese organisation approaching Zespri, aside from what he'd heard in media reports.
This is extremely hypothetical. We have, a newspaper story that says that there could be some form of sanction, but there's no investigation being announced in New Zealand. Some of the companies involved have said that they haven't been approached, and we also have the Chinese ambassador and embassy saying that they're not aware of it either. So certainly be seeking more information, and it's important to the government, but I think we need to be extremely careful not to get ahead of ourselves.
But then, 2 days later, Mr McClay said he was informed on the matter.
I've checked overnight into when I was in China. I did receive information from the embassy that an industry body had made contact with a New Zealand company in China, raising some concerns. Our embassy subsequently has checked this with MOFCOM, which is the equivalent of the Chinese Ministry of Trade. They've said they have no knowledge of it and they've denied it.
The Trade Minister, Todd McClay, who declined our invitation to be interviewed on Checkpoint tonight. A short time ago, I spoke to Labour leader Andrew Little. He told me all the backtracking means Mr McClay isn't up to the job and it's time for him to go.
Well, I think it's pretty stunning. We had a week of abject denials last week, that there was nothing to see here, there was no threat. Now we get a statement today that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade have been dealing with this over several months. So either somebody in the ministry hasn't been keeping his minister informed, or the minister hasn't been across the issue, and either way the Prime Minister has been misled. And all of those things, only the minister can be held responsible and is responsible, and I think this is such an egregious failure on his part, he can no longer continue in the role.
There is another possibility, isn't there? And I'm fixing on to a word that was used early on, and that's the hypothetical word. So in other words, there were hypothetical discussions about a hypothetical response from China, and no one was sure whether or not it would materialise. In which case, it remains in the corridors of the ministry rather than going to the minister. Is that possible?
Well, I just don't think it's possible that the ministry or ministry officials would be talking for what has been described as months, a hypothetical threat or risk to the trade relationship. They would only be spending that much time over that extended period of time if there was something substantial. And I just don't think the reported claims about threats being made to outfits like Zespri and Frontiera will be made without there being some substance to it.
What do you believe happened then? First of all, let's look at the threats themselves. What threats were made? Were there real threats? And did they deserve to be taken seriously?
My hunch is, just from following the reports during the course of last week and seeing the statement today, is obviously the steel industry here is concerned about dumping. They have been for some time. They've spoken to me about it. They've done what they're allowed to do, which is raise a complaint through the proper processes with Indy. That has somehow made its way to the Chinese authorities or the local embassy, and they have said, listen, we've got this trade relationship, this isn't good, and which is not, that's, like it or not, that's what Chinese often do, even to their trading partners, and I suspect that's what has happened. Maybe the Ministry of Foreign Affairs hasn't known how to deal with it diplomatically, but either way, when there's even an inkling of a threat like this, you keep the minister informed. I don't believe they wouldn't have done. And then the minister needs to keep, the Prime Minister and other senior ministers informed. This is our biggest trading partner, and the threat has been made about industries that are significant foreign exchange earners for us.
So you say you keep the minister informed. I don't believe they wouldn't have done. So you saying we're being misled here?
It doesn't stack up. That we then get, after a week of being told there's nothing to see here, yes, it was hypothetical, that we now get told this has been the subject of discussion for months within the ministry. The ministry doesn't discuss something for months without there being, some real substance to it. I just don't believe last week's denials.
And where do we stand now in terms of China's position, steel dumping, and New Zealand's response? Is there clarity around that?
Well, there is a process to go through. Even under the free trade rules, there's not meant to be dumping. You cannot, throw a heap of product below production cost into other markets. That is called dumping, and if that is happening, that is still a breach of WTO rules.
But how do you stand up to China? I mean, this is the issue, isn't it? And it seems to be confounding everyone, which is possibly why people were so reluctant to talk about it. How do you stand up to China without actually biting the hand that feeds? And in a very real term, that's the position we're in, isn't it?
Well, they are a member of WTO. New Zealand was one of the early countries that supported them being a member of the WTO, recognising them as a market economy. So they've got to play by the rules, and at some point those international organisations, they've got to stand for something. The whole idea is to have a rules-based system for trade. So if they're part of the system, they've got to abide by the rules, and we've got to use the processes to ensure that they do. And
what about Todd McClay? I mean, when you call for him to resign, that's just pure politics. There's absolutely no way he's going to resign, is there?
Well, I mean, let's look at the magnitude of the issue here. So our biggest trading partner has been the subject of discussion within his ministry, a ministry that he's partially responsible for what is described as some months. Either he didn't know, in which case he did, proper Westminster system, he takes ministerial responsibility for it. That simply isn't good enough. But if he did know, it's even worse. And if he hasn't kept his Prime Minister informed, that's even worse again. Either way, any way you look at it, that cannot stand. He has to go.
6:22. It's Labour leader Andrew Little. Just after we finished the interview, I remembered we'd forgotten to ask him about something very important. It's beside me if you're watching. It's a billboard outside his office in New Plymouth, which was defaced over the weekend, rather magnificently actually, and his name and head were replaced. Are you related to Stuart Little?
I'm getting the family tree down at the moment. Yes, I'm absolutely sure. The thing we have in common is that we have a big heart. We're committed to doing good things for all good people.
Do you know who did this?
No, I can't imagine. But I have to say, I mean, in the 2011 election campaign, I had a big metal hoarding that was taken to with an axe. So I have to say, having my face changed to Stuart Little is a lot better by comparison.
Yes, in terms of political abuse, it's at the sweeter, kinder end of the spectrum, isn't it?
Exactly. That's right. No, I'm flattered by it, I think.
Andrew Little, and if anyone knows who did that to the hoarding outside his office in New Plymouth, we'd love to hear from you.